countries.
Math is the math, Rob. It's just a math question.
Your math is wrong.
No, if everybody, 100% of people who could get vaccinated did get vaccinated within that 3-month period, COVID would have died in 3 months.
No, that's not clear at all.
Notice
Not
that
right-wing.
everybody that agrees with you,
Left.
you call world renowned. Everybody who doesn't, you have a name.
Scientists who are sensible, okay?
Oh,
there are plenty of...
the ones that agree with you are sensible, and the ones who don't are not? You think the only possible explanation, the only reason that they ignored it is because they had a narrative they had to fill.
It's because the White House was pressuring the FDA to approve the COVID vaccines as soon as possible so they could mandate it for the military.
Do you know what it's like to have a death on your head, let alone 100,000 or 1 million? Do you think that would impact your decision-making, Rob?
Yes, but the problem is the people that you were listening to were wrong.
Clearly
you did not read everything, otherwise you would
No,
have
I
come with a
read
different
everything that came up on archive, everything, because I was...
You read Jay Bhattacharya's papers?
Yes, I read them all.
And you weren't convinced by that?
No. Did you realize, Rob, all the people that diminished what other people were saying, you're doing the exact same thing. You're saying that your position is sensible and that all sensible people who read it came to the same conclusion. You're just as bad as the people who wouldn't let Jay and others speak.
No. All right, okay, we're back. Took a quick little break there. One quick thing I want to ask you, Mark, as an extension of what we talked before we get to COVID mandates, is do you disagree at all that there's any kind of, and this is changing now because the culture is shifting rightward and with the election of Trump, but in the past, I've seen you in podcasts sort of dismiss and scoff at the idea that conservatives or right-leaning people are being silenced or canceled or looked down upon. Do you actually not see that?
I mean, who have we not heard from? Everybody who supposedly has been quieted, we know who they are and we know what they think, right?
The bigger problem is not the celebrities, and I think that's a point worth making. It's not about Megyn Kelly or Joe Rogan and the cancellation attempts against them because they're doing really well. The point is my former high school teacher who was presenting both sides of all the arguments on abortion, gay marriage, Black Lives Matter, and climate change, and the students said they felt offended and hurt their feelings, and he's no longer teaching there. That's just one local example.
That part I think is wrong. Yeah, regardless of the topic, I think you should be able to say what you feel is right, as long as you do it within the rules. Like if you go into a school board and you just start screaming pro-abortion, anti-abortion, pro-vax, anti-vax, and you violate the decorum or the rules of the circumstances, that's different, right? If you just want to say what's on your mind in the lunchroom, talking to friends, again, as long as you're not violating rules that have been specified for everybody, great. Say what you got to say.
Yeah. And do you agree that there has been a very obvious, and there's some data on this I can present to you by FIRE, this nonpartisan organization looking at free speech on college campuses, that there's been a lot of self-censoring among conservative students and faculty members and disinvitations for right-leaning and conservative speakers on campus, a lot of hostility.
I've seen some of it, but I've seen it go in a lot of different directions, not just conservatives. And everybody these days self-censors because anything you say can and will be put on social media. And so, like Milos, whatever his name is, I remember he got canceled in something. But then, there's a lot of different, it's not just conservatives.
Okay, but do you agree there has been a very definitive and obvious left-wing bias in academia that has made conservative faculty members and students disenfranchised, marginalized, discriminated against for their viewpoints? I've, by the way, experienced this anecdotally in college classrooms.
Have you ever been to an SEC school?
No.
There you go. It's the exact opposite. I go down there, I get screamed at.
Okay.
It depends on the school. Every school is different.
Okay. But you do agree that there has been discrimination and demonization. But I don't think
it's unilateral. I think there's discrimination in both directions. I think there are people who are liberal and progressive. And I'm not a fan of Omar Ellie, whatever her name is. She goes into an SEC school. She's going to have a hard time having a voice on anything. AOC goes into a right-leaning scenario.
Sure.
She's going to have a hard time having her voice heard. So I don't think conservatives. There is discrimination against conservatives. There's discrimination against progressives. There's discrimination against everybody. Everybody's got an opinion.
I agree with that, except on average, and FIRE has done the surveys that the bias leans far more in the other direction. This is very obvious. Academia skews left, especially the social sciences, but not just the social sciences. I live in a very conservative area, by the way, here in Canada, Chilliwack or Abbotsford, BC. Very conservative area, very strong white evangelical Christian demographic here. And the college I went to here locally, expressing anything remotely like right of center, even libertarian, was strongly looked down upon.
So
And
why'd
if
you
you
go to
didn't
that
believe that
school?
there's,
Why'd you go to
if
that
you didn't,
school?
pardon?
Why'd you go to that school?
Well, it was local and made sense because of the rise of my career and family, a bunch of different things. But anyway, there is, it's been well established by, and I can cite surveys from FIRE where they ask professors and students who faces the most amount of censorship and suppression of their ideas and demonization of their ideas. It's far more conservatives, but there
Okay.
are,
Then
yeah,
that's wrong.
there are going to be,
Then that's wrong,
yeah,
right?
yeah, okay,
As long as you
all
follow
right,
the rules, I don't think you should be
okay,
demonized in any way, shape, or form.
okay. We really want to get to COVID. Let's try to spend 25, 30 minutes on it. So this is where you and I got introduced, and we had a very long email exchange on this. So there's so many things to talk about here. One way into getting into this is just your policy with the Dallas Mavericks.
Mm-hmm.
This is your quote in September or October of 2021. If you work for me, I require my employees to be vaccinated unless there's a doctor's reasons where they can't be. Like you, I don't want my kids to be at risk. It is your choice. It's up to you, but there's consequences that come with that. In September, the Mavericks had a health and safety protocol where fans had to show they had proof of vaccination or a negative COVID test. Do you still support mandating the COVID vaccine for your employees in October of 2021?
Oh yeah, I would do that again in a heartbeat.
You would do that now?
Oh, not now because there's no reason to do it now. But back then,
okay,
absolutely.
But you do realize at that point, and my former podcast co-host Jay Bhattacharya, who's now the head of the NIH, I first interviewed him in August or September of 2021, and already then there was very clear epidemiological data coming from countries like Israel and Qatar, who introduced the vaccine a little bit earlier, that even vaccinated people were getting infected, and there was no clear disparity in unvaccinated versus vaccinated in terms of transmission and infection of the disease. It was very clear in September and October that there was no community benefit to getting the COVID vaccine. And this is not just Jay. This was Martin Koldorf, Tracy Beth Hogue, world-renowned epidemiologists. So to me, that
there's a whole lot of other
sense.
People other than those guys who felt completely differently.
Okay, but those people turned out to be wrong at that time. If you looked at COVID transmission and infection rates, there was not.
There's a couple things here, right? So when the vaccine first came out in December of 2000, it was 95% vaccine efficacy, right?
Against symptomatic infection.
Yeah, against
that's what the data showed.
Right, against infection. 95% is pretty damn good, don't you think?
The original clinical trials showed that, but then as time went on, the data clearly showed the other way, that there was not a clear.
What happened was obviously the virus mutated, and we saw what happened there. And so then what we learned about the vaccine, and all the data supported this, is that people who were vaccinated were less likely to be hospitalized. Would you agree with that?
I would draw some clear caveats there, but yes, if you looked at the broad aggregate data, it did show that. But the problem is people who took the vaccine, and this is where we went over this over email. I don't know if you remembered, but have you heard of healthy vaccinee user bias, where people on average who get vaccinated tend to be healthier, tend to have lower obesity rates, lower rates of smoking, tend to make better health choices, have greater access to high quality medical care.
Smarter is what you're saying?
Pardon?
They're smarter in how they live their lives?
I mean, there's a ton of socioeconomic factors as well.
Basically, what you're saying, I mean, the whole MAHA thing, right? They're more likely to be adherents of a MAHA type lifestyle, is what you're saying.
I mean, MAHA is a very particular kind of healthy. It's a very holistic.
But it's just like do what's in the best interest of your own health. You live a healthier lifestyle, and these are all the things that you're saying, right?
Vaccinated, so just concrete examples. Vaccinated people tend to be more obese. They tend to have lower rates of smoking, tend to have greater access to medical care. And so we don't have to go into this deeply, but there was a very clear disparity in people who got the COVID vaccine and who didn't.
I could have swore you said when you first went through the list that they were all positives that were associated with the lifestyles of the people who got vaccinated.
Yes.
Because obesity would not be a positive.
Yes.
Okay.
Correct.
So that's why I analogized it to Maha, because
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Ma is just a very specific kind of health
no,
consciousness,
it's
which
just
I
like
agree with.
Buddhist medicine. It's just like doing the steps that are in your best interest for your own personal health. So I just
Yeah.
wanted
I
to
mean,
make that point.
yeah.
But at the
Yeah. Okay.
same
Sure.
time, even though they were, for whatever reasons, people who were vaccinated are less likely, and you agree with this, to be
Yes.
hospitalized or die.
Yes, but the vaccinated population is on
Whatever.
baseline much healthier.
Okay, well
So
now that's fine, but I
yeah.
required people to be vaccinated. Maybe you could presume that the people who work for me had those better qualities, right? And better lifestyle, whatever it may be. But I wanted them to be vaccinated because they're my responsibility. And I really prefer my employees not be in the hospital, productivity wise, but just personal interest in them. And I prefer them not to die. And I also know that 7% of the population is immunocompromised, and they don't wear stars on their shirts saying I'm immunocompromised. And there's a much greater percentage of people who have comorbidities that we don't know about, that aren't necessarily immunocompromised, that have had cancer or whatever. They don't qualify as immunocompromised, but they're at higher risk. And so we don't know about the grandparents, may just be old. We don't know about kids that, any of my employees who may be at greater risk for whatever reason. And so I made the decision then, and I'll do it again. I would do it again. God help us that we don't go through this again, but I would do it again because my number one priority, nothing else. My number one priority was keep people out of the hospital and alive. And anything that had a high risk component, because remember, this isn't like a car running you over. That's not contagious. It's not slipping and falling on a knife. That's not contagious. It's not, somebody bringing in a gun, to work. That's horrific, tragic, but it's not contagious. And so because this disease was contagious, I viewed it differently than anything else. And because I don't know, and I can't ask, and I didn't want to ask which people, whether they were fans of the team or whether they were in the families of people who worked for me, it didn't matter to me. I wanted to keep them healthy, safe, out of the hospital, and alive. That's all that mattered.
Yeah. The problem is, first of all, on the community benefit front, okay, Jay Bhattacharya, Martin Koldorf, Tracy Beth Hogue, many world-renowned epidemiologists and scientists in this particular area, they realized by August, September, October, especially 2021, that there was no clear community benefit to COVID vaccination.
I don't care about community benefit. You didn't hear what I said.
No, you didn't know, because you talked about grandparents who might be, you don't want to infect other people.
But that's just one line removed from the people that work for me.
Okay, yeah, okay, so
let's
talk about that then. Okay, put aside the community benefit then, because there was not a community benefit in October. Initially, when the data came out from Pfizer and Moderna, it was like, 95% effective against symptomatic infection. Then it turned out that wanes in 2 to 3 months and goes down to zero.
So then you would agree that if everybody was pro-vaccine as of December 31st, 2020, and we had enough vaccines and everybody got vaccinated within that 3 month period before it wanes, or even after it wanes, right, within when it was still had some effectiveness, then we would never have had the number of deaths that we ended up having.
No, I'm not saying that, because it's much more complicated than that.
No, why? If it's 95% effective and you get everybody, getting that vaccine, then the numbers probably would say that the number of deaths and the number of people infected would drop dramatically, wouldn't it?
But the studies only looked at symptomatic infection. They didn't look at transmission, or they didn't look at mortality.
I'm just agreeing with you that, because that's what they proposed, and that's what the initial research said, that it had 95% vaccine effectiveness, right?
For symptomatic infection for a couple of months. That's it.
Right. No, I think it was more. I think what Pfizer and Moderna said, maybe not Pfizer, but Moderna said, if I remember reading it, that it prevented infection 95% of the time. Not just symptomatic infection, but prevented infection. In the initial
there's some questions around that, but okay, sure. All right, we can go with that.
So just math. If 100% of the people got the vaccine, only 5% would have the possibility of getting infected, And the likelihood of them getting infected when 95% of the other people don't have it and can't transmit it, the math would work, right? And we would not have had the number of deaths that we had. Would you agree?
Except for the vaccine showed the evidence was for symptomatic infection, potentially infection, but there's some questions around that. But when it comes to death and hospitalization, it's very different. And then we get into relative risk reduction.
No, I get it. I'm just saying, right? You said we'll agree that, and you said maybe there's some question, but we'll agree that it was 95% effective as a vaccine for transmission. And just math, basic math.
For infection.
Yeah.
Yeah, for a couple of months.
Yeah, so basic math said within that window of a couple months, if everybody would have gotten vaccinated, nobody got bitched about it and said, let's do, what do they call it? When
my body, my choice.
No, natural immunity.
Natural immunity.
Yeah, nobody said a word about that. If everybody, I just want to make sure we're on the same page. If everybody, 100% of people who could get vaccinated did get vaccinated within that 3-month period, COVID would have died in 3 months.
No, that's not clear at all. The virus mutated.
You agreed that was the fact.
I'm saying that's what the original clinical trials showed, a 95% efficacy on symptomatic infection. Problem is the virus mutated over time.
It didn't mutate within the first 3 months.
Yeah, whatever the time frame was.
That time frame matters.
Sure. Yeah.
We're doing math here. All we're doing is math, and we're saying if we could have vaccinated 95% of the people, it would have been within that 3-month period before the effectiveness waned. COVID would have been gone in 3 to 6 months, right?
It wouldn't have been gone because the virus still would have mutated.
No, you would have got it. There would have been nobody to communicate it. There had been nobody to transmit it because they had all gotten the vaccine.
But other countries that had far higher vaccination rates, they still had community transmission. What we're talking
about within the first 3 months, though, the vaccine, that first vaccine before it mutated, that was designed for the alpha version. I don't remember all the names of them all. But they would have all captured them. If they would have had access to the vaccines, it would be gone.
Okay, but except for other countries that had far higher rates of vaccine uptake, the virus
also
still spread.
Timing that matters. It's not just higher vaccine uptake rates. It's absolute uptake. There's a big difference, right? Getting 60% of your population, okay. Getting 100%, which is what we're talking about here, 100% of everybody that could physically take it without consequences of taking it itself, right? COVID would have been gone in 3 months.
Your hypothetical is wrong on multiple counts. One is just the risk benefit analysis. First of all, it didn't make sense for everyone to get the COVID vaccine, and particularly the serious adverse event rates.
You can make it disappear in 3 months doesn't make sense.
Are you aware of the risk benefit profile?
Yes.
And so we went over this over email. So the COVID vaccines, the best available data we have is by Joseph Freeman and colleagues. Joseph Freeman is a top senior science advisor to Jay Bhattacharya now, and he co-authored a peer-reviewed study in the journal Vaccine on serious adverse events associated with the mRNA vaccines. Him and Sander Greenland from UCLA, John Kaplan from Stanford, world-renowned epidemiologists.
Notice that everybody that agrees with you, you call world-renowned. Everybody who doesn't, you have named.
Scientists who are sensible, okay?
So the ones that agree with you are sensible and the ones who don't are not?
It's the other way around. It's the ones that are talking sense. My position is only based on the best science, not on...
Nobody else is using good science, right?
If the vaccines had no issue of myocarditis, they didn't have as high of a serious adverse event rate as they did, which I'll get into in a second, then I would support it.
If you could have ended COVID in 3 months, because that was prior to the study showing the myocarditis, right? That was prior. No, you had some folks, because Pfizer had some issues on the single shot with younger kids, and so it would have had to have been Moderna, but so it's obviously a hypothetical, but COVID could have been gone if we didn't have the resistance that we had to the shot.
Again, other countries had much higher rates of vaccination early on,
but
like
Israel. They all got it either at the same time or later. And
Israel got it earlier.
Israel got it earlier?
As far as I remember, Israel had earlier
I don't think
vaccination.
so. I think they might have got at the same time, and they certainly tracked it better. But and they were the ones who showed that the hot. And again, I didn't prepare anything. I didn't look up anything.
Yeah.
I'm doing this all from memory. And they were the ones that said with their own with the insurance company that it prevented hospitalization, whatever the high percentage was, right?
Yeah. Israel did start earlier in December than the United States and Canada
But
and
just
other
the
countries.
math is the math, Rob. It's just a math question. If you have 95%,
your math is wrong.
No, if you have 95% effectiveness and it's equally distributed across the country to 100% of eligible people, it would be gone. That's the way vaccines work now. That's the way all vaccines work now.
You think we would have gotten zero COVID?
If 100% of the people, that's what the math says. Now, is it reasonable to think 100% of people would take it? No, that's just life. But if they had, if we would have seen a rash of support for the vaccine as opposed to opposition, and everybody would have got it, the first version before the first mutation, I think COVID would be gone.
But except the virus mutates, and people still.
Like I said, we had access to it. Maybe we didn't have enough shots, but we had access to it prior to the mutations.
The studies only looked at symptomatic infection, okay? And just because you take the vaccine doesn't mean you can't get a future strain of COVID.
You're more of an expert. You can only transmit if you're symptomatic, right?
The different epidemiologists say different things, but in theory, you could be non-symptomatic and still transmit.
Okay. But again, when it's 95% efficacy
for symptomatic infection, that's what Pfizer and Moderna showed, not infection broadly.
I think what they said was infection. I don't think they said symptomatic.
It was 100% symptomatic. Okay. We can look at it right now.
Okay.
It was symptomatic infection.
I'll defer to you then. But in any event, then the odds of us getting rid of COVID very quickly would have been drastically higher. And I say that because you talk about the lack of symmetric information on both sides. I think it goes the other way in this case. There was so much anti-vax information, the whole "my body, my choice" thing coming out, that really hurt how we dealt with the virus.
Okay, we have limited time, so let's try to get through this quickly. The best peer-reviewed research we have on serious adverse events associated with the vaccine is this one study by Joseph Freeman and colleagues, UCLA, Stanford, University of Maryland researchers, etc., who reanalyzed Pfizer and Moderna's own original clinical trials, and they looked at and they used a universally certified, esteemed metric created by it's called the Brighton Organization, endorsed by the WHO, a standard list of serious adverse events that's widely agreed upon by scientists. And they found a 1 in 800 serious adverse event rate associated with the COVID vaccines. Okay.
Did they pull this data from VAERS, or where did they pull the data?
No. They looked at Pfizer and Moderna's original clinical trials. Okay. They found a 1 in 800 serious adverse event rate. That is orders of magnitude higher than other vaccines on the market, which are at a rate of about 1 per million or 2 per million. Okay. Other vaccines.
When did they do this study?
This was published in 2022. I'm pretty sure. I don't think it was 2023. It was 2022. I interviewed the lead author at the time. We did a 4-hour podcast.
Why did people not accept it?
Because it didn't go with their narrative that vaccines are universal good.
Science is science, right? What would the people on the other side with a different opinion say, and why? So if I went on Twitter or X and looked to see why people disagreed with it, what would they say?
There was a very clear pro-vaccine bias, and people did not want to look at any data that showed harms, particularly people who encouraged.
100% of everybody that disagreed was just wrong. It's just their bias.
As always, there's going to be some limitations to some studies. So I'll grant you there were some limitations in the study, as any study, but that finding was incredibly alarming. And they went to the FDA. And they had a meeting with the FDA.
And what did other countries do in response to that study? What did Qatar do? What did Israel do in response to the study?
So they published their study, but it was not taken seriously by public health authorities who already committed to mandating.
In other countries that you said did it differently. So Qatar, who tracks every single human being in the country and has complete control, dismissed that study. Israel.
I don't know if they found out about the study. I don't know what Qatar did. with
So
that.
you're saying the doctors in Qatar, the doctors in Israel, the doctors throughout Europe, when it came out on archive where all these things came out, right, ignored it.
So they went to the FDA and they went to, I forget what it's
Those,
called,
I'm
the
talking about in different countries.
European Medicine Agency. They went to an
Right.
EU body as well. Okay. And for whatever reason, they did not take their concerns seriously, that
So
there
do
was a
you
1
think
in
those
800.
reasons are important?
Yes.
So, I mean, the reasons why they didn't take, do you think the only possible explanation for why they didn't implement whatever the suggestion was, obviously I haven't read the report. The only reason that they ignored it is because they had a narrative they had to fill.
If you have all your chips in the bucket of mandating, enforcing, and telling everyone to get
Around the
vaccinated,
world, every country around the
first of all,
world.
I don't think every country in the world saw that study. Okay.
Okay,
Some
so
countries
the
saw that study.
scientists in those countries, you get my point, right? It's to me, it's ludicrous to believe that there isn't a scientist somewhere in every country whose job is to work for the Minister of Health or be the Minister of Health, who isn't paying attention to every single study that's released. They're not going to just ignore it. And so,
first of all, there were other countries that did end up acknowledging this. Okay, the German health minister, he came out a couple years ago and said the vaccines have actually caused serious damage in some people, and that was our blanket policy was not appropriate. That's one example I
is that
remember
the
off the
guy that
top of
got
my head.
fired in
International.
Germany?
I don't think he was fired, but he talked about it. He talked about this openly. So that's just one example. But the point here is that they went to the FDA, and the FDA, they completely went against what the data was showing. And you had people within the FDA who were pointing this out and were saying that it's the risk benefit analysis is
Okay.
not what.
And I accept that. I accept that. Right.
You accept that.
I accept that that's what the FDA did because I don't know any better. And if they did, they did. But my point is, when people condemn Fauci and the FDA and whatever misadventures they perceive to have happened, real or otherwise, right? Then I ask the question, what about every other country in the world? What is it that they did in response? And to me, in my opinion, just to dismiss it because they've bought into the narrative, with the exception of one guy in Germany, that's not really an answer.
Okay. Also, by the way, you realize other European countries had a far more sensible, not perfect, but far more sensible vaccine policy.
Yeah,
they recommended it.
Some of them were.
They recommended it often to 65 plus, 75 plus. They did not have broad blanket recommendations.
For young, healthy had recommendations.
Countries like Sweden and Finland.
Right, but the culture of Sweden and Finland is dramatically different than our culture. And so when they made recommendations, it was still like an 80. Again, I'm doing this from memory. An 80+% uptake of the vaccine.
Okay, but they had far more sensible policies on recommending to young people.
The culture was night and day from ours.
Epidemiology is epidemiology, and your risk for COVID is your risk for COVID if you're 19 or 25. Okay. But the point is, and I'll just tell you this quickly, Dr. Philip Krauss at the FDA, who I've interviewed on my podcast, he was one of the few people at the FDA who was sounding the alarms on why these blanket approvals and recommendations, especially for young people, for boosters, it does not make sense. And the risk benefit analysis is not analysis is not favorable in young people. But the FDA overruled these experts, and they wanted an expedited review of the Pfizer vaccine approval. And when Philip Krauss and Marion Gruber, when they said we need more time, it's because the White House was pressuring the FDA to approve the COVID vaccines as soon as possible so they could mandate it for the military. That whole process was completely backwards and completely unethical when you have Biden in 2021 coming out and saying, we're going to approve the boosters before the FDA finished their review of the boosters, for example. And when they pressured the FDA to approve the vaccines as soon as possible. And so Philip Krauss, him and Marion Gruber, they were the two individuals responsible for finishing the review. They said, we need more time and we can't do this as quickly. We want to look at the data carefully. But then Peter Marks and other people, they overruled them and sidelined them and said, okay, we're going to take a look at this. You guys go away, even though they were the pro-vaccine experts. And so you had this very clear political incentive pushed down by the White House, by the Biden administration, to approve and license the Pfizer and Moderna vaccines as soon as possible.
Why do you think they did
appropriate scientific evidence?
Why?
Well,
you can stop reading.
By their own admission, they wanted to mandate it. Emails showed.
Why? What was their mission? Did they get paid under the table by Moderna and Pfizer? Was that why?
I can't read their minds, so okay. I don't know what exactly.
So do you think maybe based off the information they were getting, they were trying to minimize the number of deaths and hospitalizations in the country?
That's why you go to the FDA and CDC. As flawed as a lot of the people in charge of those places were, you go to the FDA, and the FDA said we needed more time to approve the Pfizer Moderna vaccine.
And at the same time,
and they said we need it now.
Were people dying?
Yes.
How many people were dead and dying at the time?
There were a lot of people dying from and with COVID. That's another issue.
If you're president of the United States, well, you can't because you're Canadian. But if you were president of Canada, right, premier of Canada, you took Trudeau's place instead of whoever the guy that got elected is, right? And you were responsible, and Canadians were dying. Would you maybe err on the side of doing something faster if you had people telling you this will reduce the number of deaths and hospitalizations?
You can go faster. It was, first of all, it was already happening faster. The EUA makes it faster. This was not a normal vaccine approval.
That's not the question I asked you. That's not.
It was already okay. It was already faster, first of all, but then second of all, yes, that's what the FDA and the CDC, that's what they're for, is to study these things and to approve them.
Not the point. You're going to have people who disagree. I'm sure there are people in the FDA who disagree with them, and you had somebody who had one position, and I'm sure you had other people in the FDA who had another position. And if Rob is the president, Prime Minister of Canada, and Rob has a responsibility for people living or dying. Living or dying.
But you're oversimplifying. Until you do a complete review of the Pfizer and Moderna vaccines and the boosters, especially, until you do a complete scientific review, you don't fully know how many people you're going to save and the risk-benefit profile and who's it for, 65 plus or under 25.
There's a whole lot of people who disagree with you, Rob. You know that. You know that there are people who, and I would be one of them, based off of what I read at the time, who felt that the odds were in the favor of getting the vaccine. That we both
for who?
We both agreed just a little bit ago that it was 95% effective. And so based off of we not knowing what mutation is coming or when, right, we try to get it out to as many people as possible, and it did save lives. And so then when it mutated, we had to do our best because I think the first mutation was stronger and scarier and was killing people at an accelerated rate, if I remember correctly. And so if you're in the position of responsibility, and it's easy to say, wait on the FDA, really easy. But when the droplets are flying, right, and people are dying, and you have to make a decision, it's not quite just a matter of, okay, let's wait on this one to get the FDA. It's like measles right now. Right.
Yeah. But we're missing the point though. That specific scenario was for mandates. The vaccine was already available, but in order to mandate it, they needed the full licensure, and the full licensure was pending the review by the top scientist at the FDA, who I interviewed on my podcast, Philip Krause. You can talk to him if you want, and he said we need more time for the review of this vaccine.
But again,
but Peter Marks, and coming from the White House, they said we need this as soon as possible so we can mandate it for the military. And a group of people, mostly young men who are healthy, under the age of 30 and 40, who had no clear benefit. And that's with young people where I'm most concerned about.
So again, why did I do it? Because you might look at an individual or a demographic or an age group and say, kids on campuses don't need it. Kids who are just gotten to the military don't need it. That was a mistake. They don't need it. If you just looked at that just from that, okay, you're right. But those same people come into contact who are at greater risk. And just 7% of I don't know what the number is in the military, but 7% of the population in the United States is immunocompromised. And again, we don't identify them and we didn't do anything. So
we already talked about community benefit. You said I didn't do for community benefit.
Community benefit. It's in the military is not community benefit. In the military, again, I don't know the people who are not enlisted. Maybe they're the ones that work in the office buildings. Maybe they're the ones that take out the trash that are non-enlisted, right?
By community benefit, we're saying transmission. And I'm saying by September and October, scientists like Jay Bhattacharya and Martin Koldorf saw that the vaccine was not protective against symptomatic infection. And so those immunocompromised people...
There were a lot of people who disagreed with
could have been...
A lot of people around the world disagreed.
Yeah, but it turns out that those people, Jay and Martin,
So, but you can
Marty
only make
McCary, Tracy
decisions
Beth,
based on,
they were vindicated on that.
so maybe they were, right? But you can only make the decisions based off the information available to you. And when you're responsible
Yes.
for people living and dying, you're going to err on the side of caution. If it means people, who are younger, who don't directly benefit as much, but you're doing it and you're protecting those around you because you don't know who may be at risk, if you're responsible for all those lives, do you know what it's like to have a death on your head, let alone 100,000 or 1,000,000? Do you think that would impact your decision making, Rob?
Yes, but the problem is the people that you were listening to were wrong. Peter Hotez, Eric
You're doing
Topol,
it in
Nicholas
hindsight.
Christakis.
You're doing it in
No,
hindsight.
not hindsight. At the time, I spoke to Jay Bhattacharya, and I did articles on this at the time. And this
Yeah,
is
you saw articles on it. That's great, but you have to make a decision. You have to make a decision.
Yes.
Right? And there are millions
of lives. You consulted with the wrong people. Peter Hotez.
Okay, then we can argue that they made a mistake, and you're making your point that they made a mistake. But the people making the decisions did it from the right place, and they did it with the best information.
Okay, you did it from the right place. I'll give you that.
They did it with the best information that they had available to them, and they would most likely do it the exact same way again because the information they had available to them. And I get what you're saying, that this guy published this, and the one guy from the FDA. So you've said this one paper with Mary and Jay or whatever.
I gave you 2 examples.
You gave me 2 examples, 5 papers, 10 papers. There was just as much counterbalancing information, right, from the people supporting the vaccines globally.
Except they were wrong.
It wasn't like Israel were saying we're not giving out the vaccines anymore. Qatar wasn't saying we're not giving out the vaccines anymore. Sweden and Finland didn't mandate it, but they knew they would have 88% uptake because that's the culture. And again, I didn't prepare for this, so I don't know specific.
Yeah.
This I'm doing as
they didn't push it on young people nearly as much as we did in Canada and the United States. They did not push it on young people nearly as much as we did. They had more specific carve outs. Okay. And so and this leads to and so I'm saying at the time, if you had spoken to Jay Bhattacharya, he would have given you a very different take on what was happening. And he was right.
That's the way it works. That's the way science works. You get different takes, and people make determinations. And my point is, like when we were talking about DEI, it's far more difficult when it's your responsibility.
I agree, it's difficult.
Protect the lives of millions, 330 million people, right? And there are people dying at a rapid rate. And
yes, it's a hard situation. But people like Jay Bhattacharya, he was deboosted on X. He was attacked on Stanford. He had death threats on campus, right? Professors like that.
But that didn't affect
By the way, he did studies on this. He did seroprevalence studies showing that actually COVID is far more infectious and pervasive than what was being reported at the time. And so he reported a much lower infection fatality rate in his studies with John Ioannidis from Stanford. And those studies were vindicated, by the way.
But why didn't that impact people in other countries who didn't have the same hierarchy that we do here?
Well, other countries like Sweden, they didn't have these strict mandates on young people.
Because, as I said, and you can ask them because I've read it, maybe I read the wrong stuff, their culture is different. They have a culture of adherence.
Okay, that might be one reason why.
Right.
Yeah, or they have a better reading of the science. That's possible too.
Yeah, but look at other countries. The other however many countries that there are. Why didn't they change the behavior and just say, okay, here we go. Bhattacharya, this paper is it. We're following you. Why? Why not? And the only point is
scientists make big mistakes. Smoking in the past.
Yeah, okay, it is what it is. It's
pharmaceutical drugs get pulled off the market all the time. That scientists
haven't kept up with this, but if you feel he's been vindicated, he feels he's been vindicated, great, more power to him. But when you're in the battle at the time, as you agreed with, you do the best that you can.
Yes,
I did. I had 20,000 people I was responsible for, plus thousands and thousands of employees and their families. I was going to err on the side of caution. I read everything at the time, including that paper, right? I remember reading it. And so, you did not read everything. Otherwise, I read everything that came up on archive, everything. Because I was responsible.
You read Jay Bhattacharya's papers?
Yes, I read them all, the Barrington, whatever it's called.
Great Barrington Declaration. Yeah. And you weren't convinced by that?
No, because there was just as many people on the other side, many more, who didn't agree with it either. And
that's your way of judging the truth, is what the proportion of people with each opinion is? Or is it what's the most sensible, rational read of the data. That's what should matter. Whether that's 1 versus 100, right?
So
That's what
I'm
matters,
not
right?
sensible, and when I read the data, my read of the data is not sensible, but yours is.
Well,
Just like
what
your
we're talking
definition of
about.
DEI is right, mine is wrong. I should change it.
Well, the people who
Your shit is
originated
bad.
DEI.
Did you realize, Rob? All the people that diminished what other people were saying, and you're criticizing them for diminishing it. You're doing the exact same thing. You're saying that your position is sensible on DEI and on this, right? And that all sensible people who read it came to the same conclusion. You're just as bad as the people who wouldn't let Jay and others speak.
No. I'm just saying it matters what read of the data you have. And this leads to the last thing for young people in particular. So you were attacking Joe Rogan at the time, to circle back to how we started. And so that's how we had our exchange. And from what I remember, that exchange with Joe was saying at the time that for young, healthy people, they don't need the vaccine.
Right.
And you were attacking him.
Right,
He was talking about myocarditis.
Said, right. For the reasons I just said.
In retrospect, Joe was completely right about that. For young people, the infection fatality rate was 0.003%, and
it wasn't
people
about
who were dying and being hospitalized with COVID. But again, it was mostly young people with multiple comorbidities and obesity.
Yes.
For him to say that healthy young people don't need the vaccine, he was
wrong.
100% right about that.
No, he's wrong.
And Jay Bhattacharya and Martin Kulldorff, they endorsed his position on that.
No, because they could communicate the disease to other people. That's what matters. They could be with their grandparents. They could go to school. They could go to a Mavs game, right? And they could infect other people. We don't know what.
But vaccinated people were also spreading COVID.
Again, and the whole point, they might have been, but it was less than, fewer people. And we did our best. And we tested. Remember, you had to have a recent test to come into a Mavs game. We didn't just say you had to be vaccinated. You had to have a test. And so we accepted both once we were able to test quickly. And so
if you had just done the test, that would have been more sensible, because some vaccinated people were also spreading the virus. You should have just done the test.
Either
by the
way, the point is, it's not about just this is an infectious disease, right? It's infectious.
Yeah.
It's communicative.
And within a few months, the protection against infection wanes to zero.
Not the point. It's communicative. And so because it is an infectious disease, one person can communicate it to not just one other person, but lots of other people as well.
Regardless of vaccination.
Whatever it was, and vaccination reduced the probability of that happening. Now,
for a couple months.
For a couple months. And so we asked to see your vaccination status, knowing for that couple months that your ability to infect others is reduced. Would you agree with that?
For a couple months, yes.
Okay, so for a couple months, if kids were vaccinated, they could see grandma, and if every grandma 80 years old is going to have some level of comorbidity. Somebody working in their 60s at the grocery store, at the cafeteria, right, probably has comorbidities as well. And do you think
then they should get the vaccine? If it's so protective, then why do they have to rely on other people around them to get it?
They should get the vaccine, and they did get the vaccine, but still, like you said, it's not 100%. And the more comorbidities you have, the more risk you are. And so some of us decided that it is worth it to protect those people and to protect the unknown number of people, right? Because the vaccine helped. The vaccine was self-protective to keep you out of the hospital and keep you from dying, but you couldn't know exactly when its efficacy wore down. And so there was risk associated with that. If you were erring on the side of keeping as many people out of the hospital and alive as you could, then you're going to say, even though it doesn't have a big impact on you personally, it's still worth it to protect others around you. And that was the messaging.
Right. Except that when you instituted this policy to mandate it for your staff, that was October. By then, the vaccine was already radically waning, the efficacy against symptomatic infection.
But we also didn't know because we knew that the disease was going to keep on mutating, and we didn't know what the efficacy of the next vaccine was going to be and the impact that it would have. And so I wasn't going to switch in and out. Okay, this vaccine's good enough. That vaccine's not good enough. And so it was a policy that worked for us. And from my perspective, I wanted to keep everybody out of the hospital and alive.
Right. But so
all you're saying is for the youngest population, their risk of dying or being hospitalized is far lower.
Well, I was going to get to that. But first of all, just again on the
you're not saying that there isn't as much or not greater risk to people with comorbidities and immunocompromised. You haven't said anything about protecting them at all.
Yeah. Okay. First of all, the vaccine, it's vaccine benefit versus vaccine risk, and we can circle back to risk because it's, in theory, it could be very beneficial, but for some people, they could get vaccine side effects. So you have to factor those two things in, as you know, right? But for older people, if the vaccine was as protective as the authority said it was, then they should have gotten it. Okay. But the problem is in October, when you mandated your staff to get the COVID vaccine, it was very clear at that point that the vaccine efficacy against symptomatic infection had waned down to 5-10%.
It was also very clear there were going to be more mutations and more boosters. Yeah. And it was also very clear that we couldn't, I couldn't know, nobody knew what the efficacy of those new vaccines were going to be. Agree?
Okay. Right, but the efficacy for symptomatic infection was almost zero when you mandated it. So I'm saying it didn't make sense.
It was never almost zero. It was never almost zero.
Vaccine was, most Americans, they got the vaccine during the summer months, I believe, June, July, August, and in October you mandated it. By that time already, the vaccine efficacy was waning significantly.
So we had at the MBA, they had epidemiologists left and right coming in and explaining all the data and everything. And so we did what every other MBA team did, and I was fully for it because that's what the data told us. Now, you might disagree with that.
Yeah, I do. And so does Jay and Martin and Tracy Beth Hogan, Marty Makary, who's the FDA commissioner.
Names, I know Jay's great. Some of those names I know, and I wouldn't trust them to
You think Jay's great?
Yeah, I like Jay, right? But okay. I think some of the names on that list, I wouldn't trust them to make me an omelet, right? I don't think they're objective. But
I just name people that I fully. Jay, Marty Makary, who's the head of the FDA, Vinay Prasad. Yeah, Vinay Prasad's at FDA. Tracy Beth Hogan's at FDA. A lot of people.
Yeah, Tracy. I'm not going to go into names, but there's some of those people on the list. I don't think that they're objective, but that was based off of me reading multiple years ago.
Okay. We've been over the community benefit, but for people that you mandated to get the COVID vaccine, if any of them had a serious adverse event, would you be willing to compensate them for?
I didn't have any that had one, and I don't know if I'd be willing to compensate them for. We have insurance, and they could take it up with insurance, and we didn't have any of that at all.
Okay, all right. And as far as your criticism of Joe Rogan for saying that healthy vaccine,
I don't remember what I said, but yeah, I stand by in terms of I think kids should have got it as well, not because of their own protection, but for the protection of those around them. And I get your point that
that's not how medicine works. You have to prioritize your own health. And we knew there was a risk profile for kids with myocarditis, and later the FDA acknowledged there was a risk with post-vaccination.
And you realize there was a greater rate of
stroke.
And would you agree that there was a greater risk of myocarditis for people who had COVID than those who only got the vaccine and didn't have COVID?
Okay, so this was the center of our debate. Okay, over email.
I don't know.
So if you want to get it, okay, yeah. So we this was what we debated at length, and so if you want to get into it, we can get into it briefly. So the multiple cardiologists I've interviewed, including some that would be willing to talk to you, by the way, Dr. Anish Koka, he's a cardiologist in Philadelphia, who I interviewed a lot.
I remember you mentioning that guy. That was your go-to guy. Yeah.
He administered the COVID vaccine at his clinic, including to young people, and later regretted it because he realized that he did not properly account for the safety data, and that the FDA and the CDC, their recommendations and what they were doing was often very misleading and deceptive. And so he and I have gone back, and multiple other cardiologists, Dr. Asim Malhotra, world-renowned cardiologist, Dr. Venk Murthy, another great cardiologist. Okay.
Notice all the people that you agree with are world-renowned great cardiologists, and the people who don't agree with you don't get mentioned in the conversation.
The problem is when you say that, you're saying it backwards. It's my opinion is based on what the best
scientists and my opinion at the time was the same. Not just my opinion, but also from the MBA. We had every financial interest to not do any of that. To go into the bubble, and when was the January of 21 was the bubble? I forget. But we had every financial interest not to do any of this.
Yeah. Okay. So on the myocarditis point, I've talked about this on many podcasts years ago. This feels like we're going back into like ancient history. It feels like almost. But COVID myocarditis is very different from vaccine-induced myocarditis, because COVID myocarditis, that kind of myocarditis, and Anish Koka talked at length about. It was a very non-traditional form of myocarditis. That form of myocarditis is typically in older individuals with multiple comorbidities who are in the hospital, who then also have some level of inflammation in their heart. Their heart's beating really fast. They have
Put it
multiple
in
conditions going on.
ChatGPT and see what they say. Put it in
Okay.
ChatGPT. Let's put it in ChatGPT.
Put what in? What?
We're going to say, what should be
COVID myocarditis versus vaccine-induced myocarditis?
Yeah. What is?
If you want, I could even get Anish Koka on the line.
I don't care. No, I don't care. No, that's good. What is the risk prior?
Let's just talk about it then.
Of COVID-induced myocarditis versus COVID vaccine-induced myocarditis.
I went over this data 100 times, so whatever you pull up, we can discuss it.
Oh, I don't know if you can see it, but I want you to see the prompt.
Okay. All right, sure.
The risk profile market for COVID-19 and vaccination varies significantly by age, sex, and health status. But here's the best available summary from large-scale studies and meta-analysis as of 2024. From COVID general population for young males, okay. High infection-related risk, unvaccinated individual. So highest vaccine-related risk, males. So basically it says that the incidence per million of COVID-19 infection, myocarditis per million for COVID infection is 450 to 600.
Let me just explain this to you. There's some nuances there. Okay.
No, it says they're different. And so, again, there's no, this is as objective as I can find, right? So 500 to 300. So
what would be more objective is to get a cardiologist on the line, but
so the cardiologist has one perspective, and so it's twice as much. There.
ChatGPT isn't always correct, but okay, let's see what it. Okay, Okay. Yeah. Okay. So let me. Yeah. So I've been over this data.
Quite likely to occur for.
Okay. So let me.
Under 29.
Yes. So let me explain this to you. So I've written multiple articles on this back in the day. So COVID myocarditis is primarily in high risk individuals who have multiple comorbidities, typically older individuals, but could occur in younger individuals as well. That's a very different risk group compared to healthy young males in particular, but also young women.
Now limit the question to exclusively young men, healthy, under the age of 29. Same. Double from COVID versus from vaccine.
Listen, if we're going to do this, it's going to take a long time. I was on ChatGPT last couple of days, re-looking at some COVID data, and it hallucinated multiple times to me, by the way.
Okay.
On COVID infection fatality.
I just thought it would be an objective source.
Sure. Yeah. I use ChatGPT a lot, and I was surprised how wrong it's been recently on a few things. But
infection-induced myocarditis, again, within the healthy population, often more serious, chest pain, shortness of breath, arrhythmia. And vaccine-induced, usually mild, moderate chest pain resolved in days, weeks.
Vaccine
under infection-induced myo, common especially if moderate severe COVID. Myo vaccine-induced, 90 to 95% recover at home or with brief hospital stay. Long-term damage for infection-induced, documented in some, more common. Vaccine-induced, rare, especially with early treatment. Death, rare, but more likely than from vaccine. And then extremely rare vaccine-induced myocarditis death, extremely rare fatalities, less than 0.1%, if any. So is there a chance, now maybe that's hallucinating, but here, let's see if it has sources.
the problem, you got to go to specific studies, and I know you got to go soon, so we can't.
That's what this is using. It's not.
We could spend 1 hour doing this if you want. By the way, and by the way, you could bring your cardiologist. I could bring my cardiologist.
Cardiologist. I'm going to do studies, right? And that's what I looked at before. You bring up individuals and say you believe them for whatever reason, and then you
we can bring up studies,
right?
We can do studies.
Cardiologists.
Okay.
Would you agree?
We can do studies too.
Okay, so put that all aside. We'll just assume this is all a hallucination. Would you?
No. I'm not saying it's all hallucination. The devil's always in the details.
Doesn't matter.
So countries like different countries had different studies. Countries like South Korea that had a much more active surveillance method for capturing adverse events. They found several individuals who died from vaccine-induced myocarditis. That there was an underreporting happening. In the United States, they have passive surveillance, and so you're much less likely to capture cases of vaccine-induced myocarditis, etc.
That there are world-renowned cardiologists who disagree with your world-renowned cardiologist.
Yeah.
Okay. That's all.
Yes. Yeah. And I think they were wrong. Okay.
Okay. And that's fair. You're allowed to think they're wrong. I'm allowed to think that your guys are wrong.
Okay. Well. Yeah. And you can bring your guys. I can bring my guys.
And they can argue that. And I'm sure they've gone to conferences and argued it out already. Right. We'll let that stay for the cardiology.
By the way, as a side note, there was one individual who I was talking to today. I put out a reader call out for anyone who has questions for you. And one individual said he'd be willing to bet you $10 million about the COVID vaccine risk profile. And particularly, he's saying that the COVID vaccine cost more lives than they saved. And he said he's willing to put $10 million on the line. And he said you could bring your expert. He could bring his expert.
I don't have experts, right? I'm not trying to look at experts and do this, right? Obviously, he believes in what he believes. And most likely, he's going to say my position is most sensible. And there's going to be somebody whose position is, they're going to say he's going to say whoever this guy is doesn't know what he's talking about. You can find both sides, and there's no one's going to come to a conclusion that one any more than we came to a conclusion.
Yeah. This is Steve Kirsch, by the way.
I don't care. I don't know who he is. I don't care.
Yeah, it's similar to you. He's a pretty big net worth, and he was saying you could bring your expert, he could bring his expert, and then you could have mutually agreed. You could have mutually agreed judges to decide. Anyway,
that's ridiculous.
The only thing on COVID myocarditis was studies done by Tracy Beth Hogue and Allison Krug, many other individuals, showed that for young males, the risk for COVID vaccine myocarditis was twice as likely as hospitalization from COVID.
I'm not trying to disparage them, even though it'll come across that way. They were, before they did the study, they were already against it, weren't they?
No, not at all.
Tracy,
I know Tracy well. She's at the FDA now.
Isn't the one HO with the slash through it, ANG, that worked in Denmark or whatever?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, she's a rock solid scientist. She actually came on my podcast and debated another guy who was claiming that the COVID vaccine cost 17 million lives, and she was on the other side. She was saying that your paper is pretty flawed and not showing that there's some massive mass killing happening with the COVID vaccine.
In my opinion,
she's not anti-vaccine by any stretch, by the way.
The takeaway is that you can find people in either position.
Sure.
The hard part was when the shit was going down and people were dying. Everybody, like we both agree on, including me, made the best decisions that they could. And we created our own parameters that, in my case, I felt like my only goal, all I cared about, was keeping people that I was responsible for from dying or going to the hospital. Nothing else mattered.
The only point other on myocarditis is that, as I was trying to explain to you earlier, COVID myocarditis particularly occurs in individuals with multiple comorbidities who get COVID.
Well, we limited this here. I'll ask the same question.
For vaccine myocarditis, that particularly affected young people. Okay, so those are two very different groups of people.
Per million males under the age of 29 and healthy.
So there's multiple studies that show that vaccine myocarditis was a far greater risk in young, healthy people than
we'll go to Grok, right?
COVID myocarditis. But the thing is, we can do this if you want, but this is going to take an hour. So
no, I mean we're finishing up anyways, right? I'm just curious.
Okay. I can send you peer-reviewed studies after this. You can send me your studies, and we can.
I don't have any studies. I'm just asking, Grok.
Yeah. Which is sometimes right, sometimes wrong, as I've found out.
Well, they all are. Well, yeah, it's not worth wasting time. It hasn't come up yet, but okay. You were curious.
And then last thing, just on the COVID front, the John Ioannidis, professor at Stanford, he has written a widely accepted peer-reviewed study on the infection fatality rate of COVID. And at the time, Jay Bhattacharya and John Ioannidis at Stanford, they were publishing these studies showing an infection fatality rate of 0.035% in the non-elderly population, 0 to 59. And then when you go by age, if you go by 20 to 29, it was 0.003%. If you go to people in their 30s, it was 0.011%. And you put that against a 1 in 800 serious adverse event rate, according to the best data, it did not make sense. Like, you weren't saving lives by giving it to healthy people.
Again,
right?
if
you look at immunocompromised people and people with multiple comorbidities, it's a different situation. But for healthy and particularly young people, there was no clear benefit of vaccinating, and there was an abnormally high rate of risk.
Do people who are healthy interact with people with comorbidities and who are immunocompromised?
Yes, but the vaccines didn't stop the spread. We've already been over this.
The vaccines stop the spread initially and then minimize the spread. And what you're saying what you're saying,
then it went to zero in a couple months.
Every country in the world was stupid.
Most countries in the world did not have sensible COVID policies. If people listen to Jay Bhattacharya and Martin Koldorf, who you said you like, by the way, we would have had very different policies.
I don't necessarily agree with everything, but I like them.
Okay. Yeah. And so, particularly for young people, there was the risk of myocarditis.
Rav, you just said that pretty much every country in the world wasn't sensible.
Do you have any mistakes science has made in the past?
Okay. When everybody's making the same mistake.
Some countries did it better. Sweden did it better. Finland did it better. Denmark did it better.
We talked about that. You notice that they're grouped together there. But when everybody else, look, it's fine. We'll disagree on this, and we'll let again, I haven't looked at it in a long time, and you obviously spent a lot more time with it than I have since I had to deal with it with the Mavs, right? But at the same time, I listen to everybody who had exact opposite positions that you do. And
and I listen to those people too. And people like Peter Hotez, Eric Topa, I listened to them. Nicholas Christakis, I was reading all their work. Jay Bhattacharya was far more correct. And Martin Koldorf.
You determined that Jay was more correct. I determined the NBA.
And many other people.
Right.
Yeah.
And the NBA and myself and others came to the opposite conclusion. That's just the way it is, right? That's the way science works.
Sure. But if you spoke to Jay in September and October, I bet you might have made a different decision on mandating it for your staff.
Probably not.
Probably not?
Probably not.
By the way, when I spoke to Jay, I had no anti-vax, no pro-vax. I'm like, hey, tell him, like, I'm curious about this. I'm learning this for the first time. Spoke to Tracy. I spoke to Peter Hotez online. Many other people pro-vaccine and anti-COVID vaccine. And then I came to my own conclusion. I bet if you'd spoken to Jay, you would have not mandated it for your players.
Probably not, but you never know. Because it's all, hypothetical.
And again, your criticisms against Joe Rogan, again, he said young, healthy people they don't need the vaccine.
I disagree.
Turns out he was right.
No.
For young, healthy people.
Again, you look at it as an individual person, and that's where we disagree. And then you say that the vaccine did prevent communication, transmission, which suggests that there's no reason to take the vaccine at all, except for your own personal protection, because there's nothing you can do to even minimize the risk of transmission. There's a lot of people who disagree with you on that.
Yeah, you were minimizing transmission for a couple of months, and then you weren't.
Again, we went to having tests, but at the same time, anything I could do to reduce the number of hospitalizations and deaths. And every bit of data that I could find around the world, including Israel and Qatar, when they published all their data, confirmed the exact same thing. The more vaccinated the population, the fewer the deaths and hospitalization. That has never been in doubt anywhere. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, except there's so many confounders to observational data, as you would well know.
Even within you take whatever confounders you want.
The healthy vaccine user bias was a big part of why you were seeing disparities in health outcomes. Vaccinated people on baseline are much healthier than unvaccinated people. Right?
Yeah, and that says a lot in a lot of ways, but and suggests a lot of things. But at the same time, there hasn't been. I'm gonna stick to my guns. And
all right.
Every bit of data that I've seen and everything that I've read said if you're unvaccinated, regardless, healthy or otherwise, relatively speaking, on an index, your risk is for hospitalization and death is dramatically higher.
But that's absolute versus relative risk reduction. My risk right now talking to you is much lower of dying than of being on the highway right now. Does that mean I don't drive on the highway right now?
Yeah, but no, come on. Being on a highway is not a communicable disease. There's not transmissible.
Okay, we're just talking about relative risk. Yes, of course. Yes, I know it's not a perfect comparison, but the survival rate for COVID for the non-elderly population, I pulled up these numbers again for my articles. It was 99.965% for people 0 to 59. And the people that did die of COVID and were hospitalized, they were almost entirely the ones with multiple comorbidities, had obesity.
And what percentage let me ask a different question to put it a different way. What percentage of people, any age for that matter, have comorbidities and don't know it?
What percentage of, say it again?
What percentage of people have comorbidities and don't know it?
I don't know.
I don't know the exact percentage, but it's certainly far greater than zero. I had AFib. I just had an ablation, right? So you can tell your cardiologist about, I had a PFA and so far so good. But most people, I didn't know I had AFib forever until I drank too many drinks, energy drinks, right? And then it kicked in and I was like, oh, what the fuck is this? But I had no idea. My uncle had no idea. There's people who fall over and have strokes. I know several people who had strokes that ended up because of AFib that they didn't know they had. And so it's a comorbidity that as you get older, and I'm not talking 60, I'm talking 30, that there's a lot of shit you don't know you have. There are people who fall over dead with, thickened walls of their atria, whatever, right? And so it's hard to distinguish. It's hard to do a risk analysis because that's what you're trying to do. You're trying to do a risk analysis, right? You're trying to say that the risk level is greater for a vaccinated kid who's healthy than someone who's not. But it's impossible to discern who is completely healthy and who is not. It's impossible. People don't even know it about themselves.
But there are some good indicators that show that.
No, there's no way to know. That's why nobody dies healthy, right? We all have something. And there's a lot of people who die before they should because of the some things they don't know. You have read about all the women now who are finding out that they have cancer and the numbers of cancers in kids. How old are you, Rav?
24.
Okay. The number of cancers in kids, in your age group is skyrocketing. And there's no proactive test to know. None.
Yeah. Some people attribute it to environment, toxins, diet, mRNA vaccines. Some people
I don't know about mRNA. I don't know about the vaccines. But whatever you attributed towards, right? You don't know. The individual doesn't know. Yeah. And so when you put your co-founder as having all these not having comorbidities, it's hard to know.
Sure, but that doesn't mean you take an experimental gene therapy that's been rushed through emergency use authorization. That doesn't mean that.
Okay, RFK Jr.
The study, you can read it by Freeman and colleagues. I'll email it to you. Okay. And last thing on that, that's on the 1-800 serious adverse events. Okay. Other vaccines on the market, which some people also dispute, but putting that aside, are serious adverse event rates of 1 per million or 1 in 100,000, 1 in 500,000. Other vaccines, like the swine flu vaccine, it was withdrawn in 1976 because of a 1 per 100,000 rate of Guillain-Barré syndrome. And other vaccines have been pulled for far lower rates of serious adverse events. But this one is showing 1 in 800. And the study authors, they said this is the first and only rock solid paper reanalyzing Pfizer and Moderna's own clinical trials. Okay.
So, but those clinical trials occurred prior to the first instance of COVID, right? The first, the pre-mutations.
Yes, very likely.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it's not really applicable to anything post that, right?
Well, but yeah, I mean, there's so many other factors, including the serious adverse. Yeah, what the long-term effects of the vaccine? I mean, that's also another question.
Does it use VAERS? Or no, you said it used their own data. Okay.
Yeah, and the study found that the excess risks of of adverse events of special interest exceeded the reduction in COVID-19 hospitalizations in both Pfizer and Moderna trials.
You can send it to me. I'm happy to look at it. Then what I do is I put in the name of the study and ask for people who disagree with it. And then I'll read both sides.
Sure. Yeah. But your attack, when you attack Joe Rogan, you mentioned the community benefit. You want to protect grandma, which I think is totally ludicrous and doesn't
No, are
make
you
sense.
kidding me?
But
Then that's part of being 24 years old, right? Because you worry about yourself. And
no,
it's not,
grandma can
I'm
get the
not talking about
vaccine.
grandma that you don't know. I'm talking about grandma in your own household.
Yeah,
Grandma
she got
that,
the vaccine. My grandma got the vaccine.
okay.
So
Hopefully she's fine, but you still take that
she is
risk. Or
fine.
the grandmas, that maybe it's not that you come in close contact with, that maybe that they live in the household where taking the vaccine was frowned upon. Maybe, maybe they're an anti-vax family and you don't know it.
Okay, but if I had gotten the vaccine, I still would have gotten COVID, and I still could have passed it on to grandma.
But the chances, all the numbers are reduced.
For 1 or 2 months, they're reduced, and then after that, I can still pass it on to grandma.
Okay.
So
if it's 1 day, if it's 10 days, right? Then if you're reducing the death count, that's a positive.
But grandma's going to get COVID anyways, and she did.
Grandma won't necessarily get COVID. Grandma, whatever, right? We're going to go around in circles. But I get
people were going to get COVID regardless of their vaccination status. You know this.
Yeah, not necessarily, but you can still be vaccinated and still get COVID. Yes.
Yeah, most people who got vaccinated also got COVID. Some estimates show it's like 99%. Like
it's not 99%.
Pretty much
no, it's not 99%.
Pretty much unless you're inside all day, you're not in contact with other people, you're in complete lockdown mode in 2025. You likely got COVID at some point.
Not necessarily, but in any event.
Yeah, but putting aside the community benefit, though, if we just caveat that, would you still have attacked Joe Rogan for saying young people should not get vaccinated? Like, do you think for young people there was a clear benefit, putting aside protecting grandma?
Yes, absolutely.
You still think there was a clear benefit?
Yeah, based off of what I see here, and based off of the fact that you're only giving one side of the story and not saying here's the other side. But yeah, right. So we'll let ChatGPT would have criticized Joe Rogan because ChatGPT says it's a greater risk.
For people 20 to 29, the infection fatality rate was 0.003%.
Okay.
Do you know that young people routinely participate in activities with higher risks, like swimming, horseback riding?
Yep.
So should they not do those things?
One's not transmittable; the other is. That is.
No, we're just talking right now about individual risk.
Communicable disease.
No, I said put aside the community benefit. We're just talking about
that. That's the whole point of getting a vaccine. There would be no need for a vaccine. There's no need for a vaccine for horse riding. Right? There's no need. I'm
talking about individual risk right now.
But there's no such thing as individual risk for communicable disese. That's the whole point.
We just went through the protecting grandma argument. I'm saying let's put that aside. Let's talk about individual risk now.
You can't. That's like saying, some people. It's just you can't. Like people are going to die in car crashes, but it's not.
You just said young people had a clear benefit. So I'm talking about the clear benefit. Okay, putting
right,
aside
the clear benefit is it reduces the chance of their relatives and people that they come into contact with dying or going to the hospital. That is a benefit. So, Rob, I'll ask it a different way. If you could do something that even for 60 days reduce the chance of people you came in contact with at your school or your events, would you do it?
If it didn't elevate my own risk of getting heart inflammation or serious adverse events, then maybe yes, I would do it.
Of a given adverse event, myocarditis, right?
If it was 0, then I probably would do it.
Okay, so your risk is 350 per million. Would you do it?
The best estimates for vaccine myocarditis was something in the range of 1 in 2,000 or 1 in 1,800 even, according to Kaiser Permanente and Hong Kong estimates.
1 in 2,000 is 500 in a million. So 500 in a million. I said 350 or 300. 500 in a million. That's your risk. 500 in a million.
And what's my risk of COVID? By the way, that's just vaccine myocarditis. My risk is something like 1 in 800 for serious adverse events. It's likely much higher for young people.
Not buying that study at all.
You can read that study, and the guy who led that study, he's a science advisor to Jay Bhattacharya, Joseph Raymond, and he would be happy to talk to you, I'm sure, about his study. Yeah. He'll talk to you.
I'm sure. Now, I'd rather watch him talk to all the people who disagree with him.
Sure.
And they probably still have the same position for whatever reason. Neither side is changing their minds.
Why do you get your chosen expert? I'll bring Joseph Raymond, who
I don't
works
have
at
a chosen expert. That's not how science works. It's not about having chosen
the experts you talk to.
No, I don't have
Like,
experts that I talk to. I haven't looked at this. Like I said, I didn't prepare for this at all. I haven't looked at this since I talked to
yeah,
you.
I prepared for like an hour before this. Yeah. The experts you talked to in 2021 to make your decision, I'm saying.
The NBA
Peter
brought them all
Hotez.
in. The NBA brought them all in, and those are the experts we listen to. I talked to a couple of people who actually worked on the vaccine, and so that's the feedback I got.
Yeah. Again, for young people, there was no clear benefit.
And I read the studies. And again, like I said, Qatar, Israel, they're not saying 1 in 800 adverse effects. And you're saying effectively that every other country on the planet is dumb.
They were completely misguided by the data. And people who authored the Great Barrington Declaration, Martin Kulldorff of Sweden, Jay Bhattacharya, he's American, Sunetra Gupta from the UK, they had a much better, and a much stronger, more rigorous analysis of the data.
I got to go, but we'll go with that, right? That everybody else was misguided, but your chosen guys are right.
It's not that they're my chosen guys. It's that they had a better read of the data. And they were vindicated.
Your read of it, because people obviously disagreed. There were a whole lot of people around the world who didn't have the same read. So, and that's okay. We're allowed.
Sure.
That's what makes a market, right?
Right. And so you were attacking Rogan because you felt like it was irresponsible.
Yes.
At the time.
Yep.
Right. Even though all the serious adverse
I don't remember what I said, but
I
don't remember what I said. I don't remember.
Yeah.
But yeah, if his whole thing was you shouldn't get it, I disagree.
If you're young and healthy.
Yeah.
Again, 1 in 800 serious adverse event rate. That's the highest adverse event rate we've seen ever, pretty much, for vaccines. So we'll send you the study.
The rest of the world disagreed because they were misguided.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Let's end on that because that's the perfect contrast.
All right. Okay. Well, thanks for doing this.
No, I had fun. I enjoyed it. I really did.
I'm surprised, despite our contentious debate a few years back, you said yes. So I appreciate you saying yes.
Yeah, of course. Like I said,
having a lively debate.
Yeah, and I figured it'd help your podcast, and I think I figured it would be interesting. So, and it was, and I appreciate the time.
All right. Thanks, man. Appreciate it.
Thank you.